Welcome. Thank you all for taking so much time out of your day today to come along. I really appreciate that you're taking time out your busy schedules to come and absorb some of this information. Don't worry if you miss bits or you'd like to find out more. We're going to be publishing a blog today which has the full report findings in it, and we'll send you a link to that at the end of the event. So just to provide you with a bit of context, this survey is part of a series of surveys that we've been doing since we went into the first lockdown. And the pandemic lockdowns really have made an enormous difference to the way that dads interact with their children. This is an extract from a report from the Fatherhood Institute that they published in May 2021, and it reflects on the first lockdown that we encountered back in 2020. And I was thinking, oh, well, you'll need to cast your mind back. But actually, I was watching the news last night, and of course, they're reviewing COVID at the moment, so it might be high in your mind at the moment. So before the spring of 2020, lockdown mothers of young children in coupled households in the UK were contributing at least twice as much childcare as fathers. But during the spring of 2020 lockdown, fathers in coupled households stepped up to do much more hands-on caring of their children and more housework. On average, the fathers almost doubled the number of hours each day during which they undertook childcare. And according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, fathers' childcare rose from just over 4 to 8 hours per day, while mothers rose from 7 to just over 10. So mums were doing more, but dads were catching up. As I said, this is the fifth in a series of surveys that we've been doing since that time. And down on the right-hand side, you'll see the surveys that we've done so far. Predominantly, we've asked the same questions to get some consistency from that time to now. And I hope that really this is part of that post-COVID journey that we've all been on, and provides a glimpse into the lives of ordinary dads and their personal tragedies, triumphs, struggles, and moments of joy. So just to give you a sense of, if you're a dad and didn't take part in the survey, or you are a woman that didn't take part in the survey, just to give you an idea of the design. It was a short survey. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. It's a cross-sectional survey, which means that we're not going back to the same dads year after year. It's a new sample each time. It's split into 5 sections, as you can see. So the first is a bit about you, so it's socio-demographic questions, and then information just to give us a sense of what dads' families are like. We then ask dads a bit about their home and work life, so their childcare and the amount of housework they do. We then look at work-life balance and their interaction with their employers. The next section is all about mental health and well-being. So dad's current mental health, possibly the causes of deterioration, and the support that's available to them. We also ask about dad's relationship to their child, and also their relationship to their co-parent. And then finally, we ask kind of wild card questions. So last year, we asked what dads loved about being with their children. This year, we asked what one thing would improve the lives of dads in Scotland. We also asked a question specifically for the Scottish Book Trust, actually, about what songs dads love to sing and what stories do they love to tell to their children. So as I said, this is one of a series of 5. The last survey that we completed was back in June 2022. So at that point in time, the cost of living crisis across the UK had been gathering force, and we're starting to see rises in fuel costs and food costs. And in April 2023, so just ahead of when we went out to dads, the Scottish government stated that people across Scotland are being affected by the most severe economic crisis of a generation. The effects of this are being seen now as households and businesses are having to make difficult choices. So that was back in April of this year, and then we put out our dad survey between the 25th of May and the 30th of June. So what did we find out? Well, first of all, we found out that dads really want to be heard. So over 1,000 dads took part in our survey. And as you can see, our survey findings from this year dwarf the findings that we've had from our previous our previous survey. So it really gives us a fantastic data set with which to talk about dads right across Scotland and from different economic groups, and every kind of potential dads that you can think of, we've probably heard from. So just to give you an idea of the dads that took part, as you can see, there was a reasonable range of dads with different age children. It's worth noting that the ONS data around the average age of a first-time dad is currently sitting at 33.6 years. So actually, it's not surprising to see this sort of big uptick in dads' ages around 35 to 44 and then gradually dropping off. Because obviously, we're not just asking dads with newborns, we're asking dads with children of all ages. Also, we asked dads for their postcode, and from that postcode data, we can work out where they're from. We tend to look at our location data by health board areas. So this gives you an idea of where dads are in terms of their health board areas. Again, it's worth noting that I looked at the general populations for each of the health board areas, and it looks like we've got significantly higher numbers of dads from Greater Glasgow and Clyde and the Lothians. And I suspect it's just because we have a higher density of families that live in those two particular locales rather than more rural areas. But it would be interesting if anybody's got any thoughts about that. We certainly seem to have a bit of an uptick there. Also, we asked them dads about their highest level of education. It was quite a highly educated lot, with 71% having completed a college or university degree or a postgraduate degree. So quite high education. But actually, I'm quite pleased with our SIMD data. So the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation basically splits the population of Scotland into approximately 20% blocks, and you can look at postcode data to try and find out which populations live in the most deprived areas. So SIMD 1 is postcode areas of high deprivation. SIMD 5 is postcodes of the most affluent dads. So we have a kind of spike around SIMD, as you probably expect. But actually, I'm very, very pleased about this kind of range of dads that we had. So how many children did dads have? The majority, as you can see, had 1 or 2, with just a few having 3 or more. And again, we had quite a nice spread of dads with children of different ages. So we asked dad how old are their youngest child. So they may have multiple children, obviously, with different ages of children, but just in terms of gathering data, that's the most useful way of doing it. So it's worth saying that 39% of our cohort were in the early years. So probably a little bit, there's probably a little bit of bias towards early years, but not much. The other thing actually that's worth noting here is that certainly in comparison to last year's study, we had a lot of dads who responded to us who have children of 18 or more. So obviously not dependent children, which skewed some of our data a little bit. So it's worth bearing that in mind. So last year we had 4% of dads who had children 18 or more. This year it's up to 14%. So quite a big difference. So I'll try and get into the nuts and bolts of what I found out. So the first key finding is that dads are absolutely putting their children and families first and discarding outdated social norms. I was really staggered by this, actually. So our data shows that almost half, that's 49% of dads with dependent children, so those under 18, are spending more than 25 hours per week playing with or supporting their learning. And that's kind of reflected in dads, a changing attitude, I would say, of dads. As this dad said, my generation is different from my dads and my grandparents. We're much more involved and often do the mainstay, but perception in society is that we don't, and it needs to be more accurate to life. As you can see, as I said, I was really delighted by this and really surprised, actually, I have to say. But this is the highest number of dads who are spending more than 25 hours per week with their children that we've ever seen. So as you can see in the graph on the right-hand side, we go from lockdown 1, where 40% of dads were doing 25 hours or more. Then lockdown 2, it went up to 24. And then there was a dip as life returned to normal. But gradually, it's been steadily rising again. And we're now at a point where it's overtaken the number of hours during lockdown, which to me is extremely encouraging and not what I anticipated. I suspected that there was going to be a drop-off, actually, as life returned to normal, particularly considering we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis. This figure is also mirrored in what we're seeing generally around the house. So dads are stepping up and doing more of the household chores. As you can see, 34% are doing more than 10 hours per week. So that's the highest we've recorded. And again, you can see dads, how often are dads cooking meals for their children? So 48% of dads are cooking for their children at least once a day, which is really encouraging, actually. So who's doing the most? Well, it's probably not surprising, but dads with children under 2 are certainly doing the most, as you can see. So that's the first 2 columns on the left-hand side, dads less than 1 and dads 1 to 2. And just to give you an idea of what dads are saying, I love spending time with them both, and I like that we can now play games and speak about things. I'm aware that they're only young for a short time, so I want to spend as much time as I can with them. So just to give you an idea as well, it seems to be that this isn't static. So these numbers aren't static with dads with children under 2. It seems to be that this number is creeping up. So dads spending more than 10 hours per week in 2022 was 8 out of 10 dads were spending more than 10 hours a week. In 2023, that's crept up to 9 in 10 dads. And dads, again, from the most deprived areas, so that's SIMD 1, are doing vastly more than dads from other SIMD quintiles. So almost 2/3 of dads from SIMD are spending 25 hours or more per week. That's 17% higher than last year's survey, which was at 47%. And they're almost twice as much, there's almost twice as much time of these dads than dads from the most affluent areas. So I'm sure you're all aware that this week is Challenge Poverty Week. I just wanted to say that 24% of children in Scotland are currently living in poverty. And if we really want to do something about the poverty-related attainment gap, then to me, these findings offer a real hope for the future. Our research, if you've ever had any involvement with Fathers Network Scotland in the past, you'll know that we always talk about the research that shows that that dads who are positively involved in their children's lives, that their children are more likely to be smarter, healthier, and more resilient. So by valuing the contribution of these dads from SIMD1 and fostering their interaction with their children, we really can, I think, move the dial on the attainment gap and increase social mobility within Scotland. So key finding number 2. So in the wake of COVID lockdowns, dads are continuing to choose family-friendly flexible working in order to spend more time with their children. So just to give you an idea, 89% of the dads who we spoke to were working. So a slight drop off actually from June last year, but not significantly. 25% of those told us that their work-life balance was difficult or very difficult. So that's a slight increase from 23% last year. Obviously, supportive employers can make all the difference to dads. And it's encouraging to see, as you can see, so this is the orange quintile here, that 25%, quarter exactly, of dads said that their employer supports their childcare obligations almost all the time. And as one dad said, my employer has been amazing and understanding, meaning that I'm able to take time off when necessary and work remotely. I also have a good number of annual leave days per year. I'm very thankful for the flexibility offered by my employer. And I think that was a dad who had a child, certainly under 2. On the flip side of that, unfortunately, 26% of our dads said that that their employer almost never supported them with their childcare obligations. And as one dad said, the company I work for doesn't care about my life outside of work. They make you feel bad if you don't work your days off. Another said, my employers don't seem to see the boundaries between work and home. Now I'm often doing 11, 12 hours of work and getting paid for 7.5. So dads, some employers really aren't keeping pace with the societal changes that we're seeing as dads put their children first. A lot of dads talked about the demands of their jobs. So just under 1 in 5 dads feel irritable at home often or almost all the time because their work is so demanding. So their work is really impacting on their family life. And as you can see that from the quotes that dads provided. The worst thing is stress tipping over into family life. The bucket is full to the brim, so stressful. Times like Christmas, I find really hard. I feel like I spend far too much time at work and my family are getting the leftovers when I'm too tired and grumpy. So that's quite sad to hear. Dads also talked about taking control of their work patterns, so actively making changes to their work in order to accommodate childcare or their childcare obligations. So lots of dads talked about compressing their hours or reducing their hours. Some dads even talked about changing their jobs. So one dad said, when COVID hit, I started working from home and dropped my hours to basically part-time. I've continued with this since, and it's really worked well for me. Another said, I'm now working compressed 4 days working week, which makes an enormous difference and having to take time with my family. And lastly, changed my job last year with the express purpose of having less stress and spending more time with my family. So encouragingly, 73% of all the dads who were working said that they had some flexibility on where they worked. And again, that's a slight increase in the figures from last year. Of the 692 dads that told us about their work-life balance, more than 1 in 10 dads mentioned hybrid or home working. So they weren't prompted for these answers. They just naturally expressed what was going on in their life in terms of work-life balance and told us about that. And for many, it's been totally transformative. So again, after COVID, I followed a hybrid working pattern with 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. This arrangement works really well for me. I feel I get more time with my children than as a parent pre-COVID. Another, I work from home full time, so easier to prepare meals in advance for dinner. So pick up my son and drop him off at school. Working in an office would be a completely different matter. However, working from home, I think, and this is an increasing problem and certainly something that as a home worker, the majority of the time I feel as well. So it may chime with you. Home working, particularly full-time, can present some challenges. So working full-time from the house for over 3 years is now getting to me. So I think what's implied there is that it's having impact on dad's mental health. So that sense of social isolation, certainly there's certainly from my perspective and other people that I've spoken to recently are certainly feeling that a little bit. I find it hard working with the kids in the house, but they go to nursery in the afternoon, so that's when I get most of the work done. However, largely the pros vastly outweigh the cons. And there are certainly some current concerns from dads about the impact of employers reducing or ending access to family-friendly working. Currently, my employer is flexible and allows me to work a compressed pattern to accommodate childcare, which is very helpful. However, they're threatening to remove this benefit and insist everyone adopts inflexible 5 days a week working. So this is interesting. I had a quick look at a very recent report actually from the Hybrid Work Commission that came out, I think, just last month, which showed that 69% of employees with children under 18 reported that hybrid working has made juggling their parental responsibilities easier. So what we're seeing in our DAD survey is kind of reflected in other larger studies as well. So what about those who sadly don't have access to the flexibility that a lot of dads that we've spoken to have? So for those with little or no flexibility around their working hours or whose jobs can't be performed from home, predictable work patterns seem to be really important. So this dad says, I work a standard 7 till 3, 30 days, so I always get to spend time with my little boy straight after work or school before my wife gets home. And often, certainly, I didn't have a look at this data, but I suspect this probably aligns with dads from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of these dads talked about working at different times to their partner and in order to cover childcare. And often this is at the expense of time together. So having to work opposite shifts from my wife to cover childcare and make sure the boy's education doesn't suffer. We don't get family time together and have to take holidays to have some balance. Shift workers, it was a bit of a mixed bag, actually. Some shift workers, because their shifts were very predictable, didn't mind working on a shift pattern. But I did a little bit of maths around this, and it looks like certainly the majority of shift workers were impacted negatively. So this dad says, I work shifts, night shifts, early, back shifts, and weekends too. It's been hard on my partner, who works full-time 38 hours, bringing up our 3-year-old twin boys with me not being there to help in the morning and bedtimes, etc. So you can tell actually how much stress and strain is on that family. And despite the inherent difficulties of shift working, obtaining a good work-life balance, shift workers can obtain a good work-life balance, but it's often as a result of a supportive employer. And one dad said, I'm lucky that my employer offers great flexibility of shifts, so I can manage most of our work issues. So I was talking to one of our, not partners, but friends at Flexibility Work, and this is certainly their wheelhouse. And the lady that I was speaking to gave an example of an employer that she was working with who works in the healthcare sector. So obviously there's a lot of shift patterns and a lot of people having to leave work in order to go and help care for people in their homes. And so obviously all of their workers were shift workers, but she had put a huge amount of effort into helping her employers with their shifts so they could cover their childcare or their other caring obligations. And it meant for her actually that there was her team were really, really loyal to her. So you tend to get a lot of problems with retention in that sector. And she'd kind of obfuscated that by putting a lot of time and effort into arranging shifts that work for families. So it can be done. So key finding number 3, dads are finding it difficult to strike a balance between being there as a provider and caring for their children and families as they face the most severe economic crisis in a generation. So we asked all working dads about their quality time, and as you can see, this pie chart is the results. And sadly, over a quarter of working dads said that they were almost never satisfied with the amount of quality time that they spent with their children. So as I said, we asked dads a little bit more about these qualitative data findings, and their explanations sort of provided a bit of evidence and understanding around why we're seeing these results. So first of all, dads talked about the cost of living, unsurprisingly. So providing for their family, particularly during a cost of living crisis, means for some, work has to take priority. So one dad said, sometimes it's hard to pick my work over my children, but I have to prioritize work over my family so I can provide for them. Also conflicting demands on dad's time. So conflicting work and home commitments make it difficult to focus or appreciate either. These are often coupled with feelings of guilt and regret. It's a tricky balance to strike, and I rarely feel like I get it right. Either I feel guilty about working or I feel guilty about spending time with my family. I was having a look at the Understanding Scotland report, which was published in August this year, and it revealed that the cost of living crisis had hit working class Scots and those with children the hardest. So 22% of those with grades C, 2, D, and E reported that their finances are much worse now than they were a year ago. And that's set against 15% of those with grades C, 2, D, E believe that their situation will worsen severely in the last year. So that's the most deprived families are saying that their finances have got worse, and they think that their situation will worsen severely. Also, 1 in 4, that's 25% of dads in households with, individuals in households with children think their finances are much worse than a year ago. That's in comparison to 17% of those in households without children. So as you can see, the cost of living crisis is impacting families from the most deprived areas, and actually families in general the most. So despite all of this, dads are continuing to prioritize their children, and they're telling us about it. So when asked about their work-life balance, dads were specifically talking about how they were prioritizing their children. As one dad said, family comes absolutely first. It can be a struggle at times. I try not to miss the things that are important to my children. If it's important to them, it's important to me. It's really that simple. But all of this pressure, so the pressure to be there for their children, the pressure to provide for their children, and also all the other pressures on families to clean the house, to do the garden, to walk the dog, all of that pressure is taking its toll. And you can see this in this question. So we asked dads about how much time they spent on themselves, really. So 10% of dads felt this pressure so acutely that they told us that they work so hard, they don't have any time for themselves, almost all of the time. And as one dad said, it feels like a conveyor belt. Get up, log on, take daughter to school, log back on, work until dinner time, eat fast, try to get daughter to bed, but too tired and frustrated to enjoy the time. Daughter doesn't want to sleep, so less time for ourselves at night, and then too tired to do anything except stare at the TV, which is pretty sad. So again, it seems to be that dads with children aged between 1 and 2 specifically are specifically hard hit. So 45% of dads with children with their youngest children aged between 1 and 2 found work and family life, balancing work and family life difficult or very difficult, and that's compared to an average of 25. So you can see there's a big difference there. As one of these dads said, my working hours means I'm unable to take my son to many group activities, etc., which are available during weekdays. There are some at weekends which I take advantage of when I can summon up enough energy at the end of the week. I try to finish work early some days to give us more time together. I then need to make up the hours at other times, which can be difficult to fit in. So interestingly, dads also from SIMD1 told us that they were not satisfied with the amount of quality time that they spend with their child. And that perplexed me a little bit, actually, because dads from SIMD1 were spending 40% more than average time playing with their children and supporting their learning. So definitely proportionally higher than most. And they were 20% less likely to tell us that their work-life balance was difficult or very difficult. So it should be that they feel as though they have quite a lot of quality time with their children, but that's not the case. So it made me start thinking about, well, what do we really mean by quality time? What do dads think of when they think about quality time? I don't have the answer to that, but certainly it's something that I'm going to ask in the next dad survey, is to try and qualify what dads mean, or what dads feel as though they mean when they hear the word quality time. My suspicion is that it might be that quality time for dads from the most deprived area is linked to spending money on your children, so taking them to soft play, taking them to the cinema, going out for a meal, all that kind of stuff. But it's just a hunch, and I'd like to explore that a little bit more next time. So I'm going to stop there, actually, and hand over to Scott for a little second and take any questions that you might have. And I'll take a breather because I feel as though I've been talking non-stop. So if anyone's got any questions or any thoughts, do let me know.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, well done. Get that break, get a cup of tea. So yeah, I'll throw it open. You can jump in if you've got something you want to ask, or raise your hand, or like I put previously, just pop it in the chat box. But yeah, we'll open it up to you in discussion. So has anybody got anything they would like to add or ask, or any input at all, then please fire away. If not, I'm going to start picking on people, so it's up to you. Tom's got his hand. Go on, Tom.
Hi, Kathy, Scott and team. Really, really interesting findings coming out. Just a quick question around who is kind of missing from your data, who are we not capturing evidence from in terms of diverse communities, for instance, around that. Who would you want to target next year around this, and some push on ensuring we've got diverse representation in your sample, because it's a great sample size, but I'm just wondering around some of that diverse. I know Scott and I have had previous conversations around different experiences for diverse communities, so just Just curious around that.
That's a really good question, actually. We haven't asked dads specifically about, for example, whether they're part of a BAME group. I mean, we could do, I suppose we're always on a bit of a tightrope, actually, because we don't tend to incentivize the dad survey, so we can't make it too long. So we have to kind of condense everything into quite a short survey. But we certainly could look at trying to establish a little bit more about who dads are and pick on particular dads groups. Certainly we're interested in, there's a big difference between dads who live with their children and their partner and dads who are separated from their children for one reason or another, and certainly lone parents. So we distinguish between those groups because actually the answers that they give and their experience of fatherhood is very, very different. But certainly if you've got any requests around that, Tom, please do let me know. Stick it in the chat box and we'll look into that next year for you.
Thanks, Kath. I think the only thing I would add to that, and we've been having this discussion as a team quite a lot lately, and it is going to be part of the next phase of the work that we do, is the fathering from a distance. You know, trying to get the voices of the fathers that work away a lot. So you've got military, oil rigs, and how they can sort of, it's difficult to slip back into family life. And I know only from experience of working with the military is it's difficult to come back and have that relationship when you've got that one person who is always there, that becomes the higher court for everything. It's quite difficult to know whether they find that. And from the limited research that's been done as a team, but by myself as well in this area, is that if there's siblings in the house, for example, particularly a male sibling that is of a older age or high teenage, they feel that responsibility of the dad when they're not there. And sometimes you see a bit of conflict when they come back, because it's, I've been filling this role while you're not here, now you want to take that responsibility back off me. So that is a voice that we definitely want to get a little bit more. Like you've said, different communities, looking at religions and faiths and how that barriers towards systems, I think, is definitely what we would look for next year. So no, it is a very good question. And I think it's what we do like about this. And obviously I've been with the organization for a year. So before that, it was seeing it from a distance, is the fact that the questions do remain the same. You know, so we are getting the same. I think sometimes there's the tendency that, right, we've asked these questions, we've got this answers. Next year, we'll ask different questions and we'll try and change it a little bit. And apart from the odd question, the core of what we ask will stay the same. And I think it's better for the data to travel that way. But yeah, we'll definitely add some questions. So like Kathy's just said, anybody that's got any suggestions, please put them across. Anybody here that has contact with either Kathy or myself that's got email addresses, if not, we'll put them in the chat box or go through the website. But yeah, any suggestions, we're always looking to expand the knowledge base that we've got. So by all means, yeah, suggest it be a thanks, Tom. Thanks for your question. There's a couple of questions in the chat, but Rachel realised her hand must be tied. It's been up for a while. So if you want to go first, and then I'll address the chat box, then hand back to Kathy. Are you still there, Rachel? Erin, you've got your hand up as well. Do you want to ask you a question while I go through the chat box?
Yeah, I think Rachel's just getting the chat and we're not hearing that up there, but I can go ahead now. I just want to ask around baseline data. A lot of the work that I'm involved in is looking at the difference in experiences between dads and mums. I know that's certainly the same for yourselves. Just kind of, there's a lot of the findings that you've got there about employment and issues that are around with employers. That may, some of that is a bit of a sources, and I'm sure lots of mums face it as well. But what we know is that dads face that to a much larger degree, and it's a bigger issue for lots of men and families. I'm just wondering if you have any data on where some of the sits around the difference between mums' experiences to dads.
It was a bit crackly, so I couldn't quite hear you, but I think, sorry, Erin, was that around the difference between mum's experience and dad's experience of work life?
Yeah, so some of your findings are in relation to things like issues with employment and the barriers around. I'm just wondering if you've got similar data sets around what mums face to show that it is a bigger issue for dads.
Yeah, there was a really good piece of research done last year with the Nuffield Trust that looked at the caregiving responsibilities between mums and dads. I think it was called Breadwinning Mums and Caregiving Dads.
Yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
So that's probably worth looking at. So it's about mums and dads' experience of caregiving. And it looked at the cohabiting relationships, I suppose, and what provided the best outcomes for parents around their work-life balance. So they looked at where dad was a full-time breadwinner and mum was the predominant caregiver, and vice versa. So dads were the predominant caregiver and mums were the predominant breadwinner. And then where you had more equity in the family. And what seemed to be the case is that mums and dads felt happiest in their relationship when there was the greatest amount of equity. But Erin, there's quite a lot of research around that, and I'll happily provide you with more information around that. And actually, Joanna, who did the work on cleaning our data set and doing the initial run through of our data, actually has a specialism in this area. So I can ask her for a bit more information and pass it on to you if that helps.
Thank you, that's great.
I'll make a note.
I'm just going to go to some questions that are in the chat box. One in particular, which is a really good one from Lydia. Lydia's also posted that piece that you're talking about with the Nuffield. She's put it in the chat box for anybody that wants it. Thank you very much for that. But the question is looking, did we actually target dads that have got children with learning difficulties, disabilities, or mental health problems, which we didn't. But again, I think it's a good area to look at, because again, it's when you do run focus groups, particularly around autism in particular is one where I have spoken to lots of fathers, there is a difficulty understanding, and sometimes we don't bring them into the conversation within education departments enough, so they do sit on the peripheries a little bit. So I think their take is quite important. But also when you do speak to dads, if there is additional needs or disabilities, one thing that I've found from the work that I've done is that it's like it's their fault, because they've failed to protect their child from what's happening to them, and they do take that quite personally at times. And it is a real barrier, and it is obviously added to the fact that they do struggle sometimes with mental health problems themselves from the guilt that they carry. So no, it's not something that we specifically address, but again, it's definitely something to look at going forward, because it's something that comes out more. And then just very briefly before we go to, I think it's Amy who had a hand up next, 2 minutes left. Cheers, Connor. Is that when you look at this piece of the caregiving dads and the breadwinning mums, we know the role of a father in the last 20 years has changed, and sometimes it's difficult to see where society kept up with that change. But we had a man called Errol Murray do a DADx recently from Leeds Dads, who runs a dads group. He also works in perinatal services. And what he was explaining is that in 2019, it was sort of 1 in 10, 1 in 11 of the parents that stayed at home was dad. It's now 1 in 6. So there is a lot more dads who are the primary carer that are staying at home, ever so slightly more. Some of the research would indicate that that's purely down to the fact that mom had better career projections and earned more money, so she's the one that went back to work, and he might be doing something else, because we know that both parents are probably working more than they were before now, just to pay for how expensive things are. So you looking at these sort of questions, looking at the fact that the landscape has changed, it's why we're trying to get this information. But what we are finding from what has been said, particularly around about the mental health, particularly around about the challenges, is this old notion that men don't talk. We know it's not true. What we need to do is give them the platforms to do so. And that's what this survey has proved, that they do have a voice and they do want to share it. So whatever questions we can look to add in the future, we definitely will. So thank you for your input, and I'll hand back to Kathy. Oh, no, I won't. Sorry. Amy, you go first. If we're late, we'll just have to wait. Connor, you just have to wait. Amy, your question first.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Kathy, for the research. It was really good to hear. I know we had an initial chat about a month ago about some of this, so I was quite looking forward to actually seeing the more detailed outcome. I suppose my only kind of comments and thoughts was about the kind of quality time. I suppose from my angle, I'm always thinking about play and play with the children, and how do you have kind of quality time and that side of things. And that's what a lot of our work is about. So I'd be really keen to link up with you outside of the call about kind of exploring that kind of quality time, play side of things in the next kind of feedback and survey you do, because I think we could link the two in together, because I think there is definitely that perception for some that, you know, having quality time is about that kind of paid side of things, but actually you can do it at really like low cost, and have actually more engagement with your child and more effective kind of bonding. And so yeah, I suppose it's more of a comment than anything else. So please do link it with me, because I'd be keen to explore that kind of quality of time and play and how they kind of interlink quite nicely.
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Up for that, for sure. Definitely happy to work with you guys. As you said, it's a hunch for me. I suspect, you know, it will play out. But it's interesting. I was speaking to Tim Porteous, who's a dad's worker and has been involved in the sector for a very long time, and he's also a storyteller, and he's a real strong advocate for you know, your life, you know, the quality time that you spend with your child being, you know, what you see on your trip to the shops, and, you know, jumping in puddles, all that kind of stuff is so important. That kind of richness of growing up through the kind of incidental stuff that happens in your life, and that having and showing the quality of that time. And I think we have a kind of, he called it, what did he call it? A sort of a false folklore about needing to pay for stuff in order for it to be quality time, and sort of unpicking or unraveling that perception that you need to spend money in order to have fun and for it to be of quality. So yeah, definitely an area that I'd really like to explore a little bit more next year.
Great, thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, the comments in the chat box I'm addressing by typing, Kathy, so you're good to share your screen and carry on. So
okay.
Connor doesn't keep shouting at me.
All right, I'll head back. So let's just see whether I can get that right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
So the next section I'm going to talk about is key finding number 4. So dads experiencing poor mental health need more support. Oops. Oh, sorry. So it looks on the face of it that dad's mental health appears to be improving somewhat from last year. So as you can see, so there's 2 columns. The column on the left-hand side is June 2022, column on the right-hand side, June 2023, so this year's study. And as you can see, most of the lines are pointing up, which is good news. So the dads who are telling us that their mental health is very good has gone up from 4% to 16%, and those that said it was good has gone down slightly, and those that are usually okay are kind of somewhere in the middle. But what I'm really interested, if you look at the top of the screen, so the dads who told us that their mental health was very poor was just 6% last year in June 2022. That's grown massively in the last year, and it's now up at 13%. So those that are experiencing the greatest difficulty have increased significantly in that last year. So it's more than doubled in the last year, and that's cause for some fairly serious concern, I would say. So these trends are kind of mimicked in dad's outlook for the future. So again, generally, actually, it seems like dads are a bit more optimistic at the moment. But for those who are very worried about the future, again, that's gone from 8% last year to 13% this year. So we asked dads who were very worried or somewhat worried about their mental health to tell us a bit more about what might be causing the deterioration in their health. So we had 146 dads explain why their mental health had got worse. And 2/3 of those dads talked about issues with either money, work, or once again, their ability to cope with these competing demands on their time. And often dads would talk about one thing and another, or work and then an issue with their family. So it's these sort of competing demands. It's sort of a strata of worries and issues that's causing mental health issues. So the dads that talked about work, so 29% of dads talked about work, and many told us about the pressure of work causing stress, anxiety, and burnout. So it's that pressure on them to have to work all the time. So due to the pressure of my work and my other responsibilities, I often suffer from burnout, fatigue, stress, and anxiety. I feel this affects my relationship with my children, as I do not have the energy or presence that I would like to have with them. Also, dads talked about money. So 24% told us about the financial pressure that they were under. They felt particularly as a result of the cost of living crisis. So money was an issue. Lots of them talked about the cost of living crisis. So my mental health has been hit hard with trying to afford things for my kids with the cost of living crisis. And I lost my job, money worries, 2 autistic kids at home, and really struggling with life. And again, as I said, these competing demands. So 1 in 5 dads talked about competing demands on their time, often causing them to feel overwhelmed and exhausted. I often feel overwhelmed and like I'm going to fail my child, which is really sad. And again, I think that was from a dad with a very young child. And again, torn between wanting to be there and earning enough money, and I feel like I'm 2 people. As I said, this is often in combinations with concerns about work or money. So burning the candle at all ends, no downtime, no time for self, workloads ever increasing, financial worries, cost of living crisis, etc. Just reaching mental and physical burnout. So someone asked about families earlier on, and it's very interesting actually that although dads talked about various different aspects of their family, so perhaps their child was having difficulties at school, or there were other issues within the family, what really stood out to me actually is the number of dads that were talking about children with additional support needs. So as this dad said, I have 2 neurodiverse kids, neither attending school full time. So as parents, we're constantly feel like we're failing. A lot of dads also talked about the loss of a loved one. I suffered a mental health crisis last year due to a reaction of losing my wife. Due to the suicide of my brother in 2020, we've gone through a very tough time. It hits much harder than I thought, and has been an uphill battle to improve my mental health. Dads, a lot of dads talked about chronic mental health conditions that they had. So mental health conditions they felt they'd had all their life, or certainly for a long period of time, and the peaks and troughs of their mental health condition. Some certainly talked about their mental ill health being something that's quite current and quite new. This one dad said, struggling to motivate myself, no energy, and a constant low mood. Often as well, dads talked about the link between their physical health and their mental health. So a physical injury, so whether that's a back injury or something that's happened to them physically, really impacting on their mental health. And I think that might be something that's particularly prevalent in dads. I need to probably have a look at the literature around that. But this dad says recovering from a long-term injuries, so being able to exercise, which in turn has led to unwelcome weight gain, so being a bit of a downward spiral in mental health. Dads also talked about the effect that their partner's mental health was having on them. My wife suffered a mental health breakdown, and it's affected me a lot. And my wife has depression and social anxiety. This has impacted in every element of both my working and family life. Dads with younger children as well often talked about their partner's postpartum depression or anxiety, and that affecting them. I can't remember whether I've got any of the quotes from them, but certainly it was a big issue for dads with younger children. So lone parenting and co-parenting. This group particularly were impacted, their mental health was impacted. So 47% of those who told us that they were living alone with their children told us that their mental health was very poor or not great. So this dad said, abandoned by my wife and left to bring up 3 young children, having to always put a strong face so that kids don't see how difficult I find life at the moment. And I'm sure that's a sentiment that's reflected in most lone parents, actually. Also dads 41% of dads who live apart from their children's other parents, so perhaps separated from their partners or divorced, told us that their mental health was very poor or not great. So one dad said, stressed due to fighting for my rights as a dad to see my daughter more, overworking to pay for legal fees to get more time with my daughter. I'm sure, so Alistair Williams is on the call today, and I'm sure that he can speak a lot about the experience of dads and actually co-parents and the effect of separation and divorce on mental health of this group. Another dad talked about a short-term relationship that they'd had as well. And it kind of stood out to me. So I had a short-term relationship with a girl who ended up pregnant. So I now have another daughter. She's perfect, but it's a struggle to getting to see her and getting money and adjusting to my other daughters who come every weekend. So I think he had four children maybe, but it was that notion of blended families actually causing difficulties, just how you apportion your time within a blended family, and the addition of a new baby and how the dad was going to pay for it, and all sorts of complications around that can be very, very stressful. Dads with children under 1. I'm sure a lot of you will know that dads with children under 1 are really disproportionately affected by poor mental health. And if you haven't been along to our training on understanding paternal mental health, I do urge you to do it. We do a free taster session on it. But I'm going to just read out some information about dads with children under 1. A meta-survey of 43 studies across 16 countries in 2010 suggested that 10% of men suffer from depression between the first trimester and the partner's pregnancy and the end of their first year of life. However, the figures for fathers between 3 and 6 months after the birth is significantly higher at 26%. And that's in real stark contrast to the average in men, which is just 5% across an average year. So you can see that actually what's happening with dads during that period of becoming a dad affects their mental health significantly. And one dad said, obviously our data shows that. And as one dad said, my relationship just hasn't been the same since the baby. My release mechanisms and coping strategies of seeing friends and exercising have stopped. I can't do all the stuff my wife does, and I didn't experience the physiological changes like my wife. I'm just the same guy, but feel like half the one I was. And also dads, again, from the most deprived areas. So 25% of dads from SIMD1 told us that their mental health was very poor, which is almost twice the average. As one dad said, I'm tired of working harder with any spare time spent either cleaning, parenting, or eating. There's no space for breathing and figuring out myself. I think, again, that was a dad with a younger child. I feel depressed about the amount of time I work, and most of the money I earn goes towards household bills, and everything seems to be going up in price. So again, it's that notion that for dads, particularly from the most deprived areas, they're being hardest hit by the cost of living. Don't think I'm going to talk about that, actually. So we asked all these dads who told us that their mental health was getting slightly worse or much worse, about what support that they'd looked for. So that was 334 dads in total out of just over 1,000. And really encouragingly, 90% of those dads told us that they looked for or had received some kind of support, which is really fantastic. So 71% of those had reached out or shared how they felt with a partner or friends and family. So you can see these are the top 2 bars of this graph. And then 38% had sought help from GPs and other professionals. And sort of down closer to the bottom, 10% of dads had contacted or received support from mental health support group. So for me, this is really welcome news, actually, because peer support is particularly effective at reducing stigma around men's mental health. So I'm pleased to see, although it's quite a small number, so it's only 1 in 10 of those dads, that's probably quite a lot higher than previous years. So I think that's very good news. However, there are still many dads that are feeling isolated and unsupported. As this dad says, I do suffer from anxiety, but I do not tell anyone, and I do my best to push through each day. This is a bit disappointing, actually. So we asked all of the dads who we surveyed about the organisations that they'd heard of that support mental health. And the results kind of surprised me, and I was kind of disappointed by them, actually, in a way, because only 46% said that they'd heard of Samaritans, 33% of Breathing Space, 29% of SAMH. So those top 3, which are very big organisations. Then we have CALM, which is quite a big campaigning organisation. So it's campaign for, I can't remember. I'm having a moment. Obviously, the Men's Shed Association and Andy's Man's Club, which have blossomed, I would say, in the last few years. But for 3/4 of these services, only 10% or less had heard of them. So there are services available that dads just don't know about. And as one dad said, he said that more effort needs to go into making the existence of these services listed in the survey more prominent, because he didn't know anything like these were available. So certainly for me, that's an area where we can do more, is just make sure that dads know what's available to them. Because at the moment, it seems like they don't know. So I'm just going to stop there, actually, and hand over to Scott, and I hope if she's around.
Yeah, hope so, yeah.
Fantastic. just so they can talk about some of the findings, and about men's mental health at the moment. So do you want to introduce Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So yeah, I do have the pleasure. You've already heard me speak a little bit. So Hope and I are going to talk, but I'm going to bring in Hope first, just to change it up with a different voice. But yeah, it is a pleasure to introduce the wonderful Dr. Hope Christie, who is here. I can see her. So Hope, over to you, just to give you a little spin on the conversations that you've heard today, but obviously the conversations we've had about the data over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, all yours, Hope.
Thanks so much, Scott and Kathy. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a wee bit late, but hopefully can add to the conversation now I'm here. So yeah, we had the pleasure of looking through some of the qualitative data and chatting with Kathy and with Scott about some of the mental health data that's been discussed. And yeah, I should have said as well, actually, my background, I am a psychologist and have worked a lot with kind of parents, mothers and fathers who have gone through kind of trauma and PTSD. So a lot of this work that through the survey actually resonates quite a lot with some work that I've done with families as well. So I'm really, really interested in looking, I know that you've probably already covered it, but looking at, you know, the kind of still poor mental health that fathers are reporting, and the fact that it really just seems to be kind of work-life balance and cost of living crisis and money stress that seems to be the main drivers of that. And I know I came in just as you were talking about it there, Kathy, about this kind of need or thought that you need to spend money to be a good parent. And I think that really reminds me of some work that I did with a father once who'd he used to, not just due to his PTSD, not be able to take his teenage daughters into kind of shopping centres and stuff because it just was too overwhelming for him, but he used to take them out for hikes and they'd learn about things as they were walking. And I think at the end of that discussion, he'd said, you know, like, oh, I think we've concluded that I'm a really crap dad because I can't take them to where they want to go or buy them things or do whatever. But actually, I actually think they'll probably remember those hikes with him more than him taking them to a shopping centre. So I think if there's stuff that we can do going forward around kind of reframing the fact that you don't need to spend money or to kind of feel like you're a good parent. And I noticed that, Kathy, you talking about a lot of dads feeling like they failed or that they're failing, or that word kind of gets used quite a lot, and which is really, really sad to read, because I'm sure they're trying their best and want nothing more than the best for their child. So, and I did actually just want to point out as well, through looking through the data, actually, they had some really nice positive comments. I think I noticed one dad said that actually about their mental health, that they'd experienced a lot more family harmony and a time to play with their children and do different stuff as their work patterns had changed, which I thought was really nice. And another one talking about the arrival of a new baby, and it's the dad has said his arrival has just eased everything off. I don't feel kind of the same suffocation that I had prior to him coming. So I thought that was a really nice comment as well. So there are some positives in there. But
I was going to say, actually, yeah, it's quite interesting. And I probably there's so much that hits, got so much data, so much that hits the cutting room floor. But you're quite right, actually. There was quite a lot of dads who reflected on their mental health, and a lot that reflected on how much they were getting better, actually, and the positive effects on their family. And yeah, probably I didn't draw that out into this presentation, but certainly the data and the quotes are there that support that actually mental health support does really helps a lot of families to get back on track. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out, actually, Hope.
No, not at all. No, I think it's nice to point out, obviously, that it's still important that we've got quite a significant proportion of dads that are rating their mental health as really poor, and that does need to be talked about. But nice to kind of talk about the kind of some of the positives that did come out of that. But yeah, there's just so much data. And just quickly as well to touch on, because I know Scott and I chatted about this yesterday, about the proportion of dads that actually don't live with their children and how that might affect their mental health and well-being, and also just their ability to parent. It's a really difficult dynamic to work through, and I think that's probably another area that deserves quite a lot of close attention, just to think about the number of dads that maybe don't have access to their children, or there's maybe some turmoil or relationship difficulties going on there, which is preventing access, which obviously is going to have an impact on mental health and well-being as well. So I'll stop blabbering on now. I'll hand you back over to Scott to talk about his bit of this.
Thanks, Hope. No, I could listen to you talk for hours. Don't worry about it. I will try and keep this brief, which I'm not very good at for anybody that does know me, because I do want to leave space for questions. But what we will just look a little bit at is that sort of bit children under 1 and 2, or that perinatal period, that transition into fatherhood, where we do see some of those struggles. And like Kathy said, it is something that we do specifically look at in training. And James has put a question in, which I think is worth addressing at the same sort of time, and then we'll open it up to questions. Because what we do see, so James's question is looking at the fathers that are maybe struggling or expressing struggles with mental health. Are they still interacting and playing with their children? And I think that that's something that we do need to look at a little bit more, because statistically what we do say is the father that is depressed in that perinatal period or with small children is less likely to play, and then we don't get the rough and tumble play that we know is good for children's development, and they sometimes a little bit more critical with their language. So that's what we see. So when you work with fathers, it's just trying to sometimes reframe that even if they are feeling bad or things are difficult, if they're still doing this, if they're still making that time to do that, even though they are struggling, you know, that what that does show is that they are prepared to show up. And that they will, no matter what's going on, they will still do this for their children. They don't feel like it. Sometimes you've got to dial it in, you know, and I think anybody here who is a parent knows that we've all read that bedtime story awfully quick some nights, because we just want to get through it and get back downstairs because we've got 101 million things to do. And it's sometimes maybe reframing it. And I think that's what fathers sometimes struggle with. And it goes back to the quality time thing that we realized earlier on, is that we think that it has to be these big grand gestures, and we have to do the voices and the animations. And when dad's reading stories, he has to actually become the Gruffalo. Whereas sometimes we can just read that story. You know, there will still be benefit from it. It's about the relationship development. But the fact that fathers can do that when they're struggling is a real positive. We don't emphasize that enough with fathers. The ones that are sort of still showing up and doing these things, even though it is difficult, or they are doing it from a distance. The relationship stuff that we've touched on earlier on, this is something that fathers do. We know this from the research, but anybody that works with fathers knows this, that transition into fatherhood, if they are with their partner relationship, that transition, that change is difficult. That drop down the pecking order, that thing that things are a little bit different, and they're trying to understand where they fit in this realm, in a system that doesn't address them. Again, something that we highlight quite a lot. They are referred to quite often as partner. And as we do like to stress quite a lot, partner is the relationship to the person that gives birth to the baby. It's not their relationship to their baby. So from the very beginning, we tell them they're an inferior parent. And then we wonder why they struggle to engage with parental services, because we never really brought them into the conversation in the beginning. And if they struggle with mental health in that period, it's difficult to get access. So what I would like to finish on in terms of the highlight is the fact that they are having these conversations, the fact that they are aware of them, the fact that they are, I don't want to use the word articulate because that's quite condescending, but they've been able to express it in a way that they know these things are there. They know they're finding it difficult. And when you look at a lot of the research that is out there for mums, and a lot of the quotes that you will see online, and it's, how do I know I'm going to be good enough as a mother? And it's the very fact that you're thinking like that highlights you already are, is the message that we put out. And I think that is a very good message. We don't say that to dads enough. You know, the fact that you are worried about these things and you're finding them challenging, and you do want to be there, and you're trying to be in lots of different places all at once, and be the provider, and be the caregiver, and be the parent that they want to be. The fact that they want to do these things should be celebrated. But we live in a society sometimes that doesn't quite do that. And I think just the fact that they're aware. And I said the last thing, this is the last thing I promised, and I'll go back to Kathy, we'll open up to questions, is that when we look at that support side of it, this is why we need to maybe have this conversation more, is, you know, 60% of those dads said that where they're looking for someone to talk to, they go to their partner, which shows how important, obviously, that relationship is. But when we look at mental health, particularly in the early days, if you've got, for example, a mum that's got postnatal depression, we now know that makes the father much more likely to experience depression themselves, trying to support through that. What we don't talk about enough is that goes both ways. So when we look at mum as the patient in the beginning of this journey, which is correct, I'm not saying it's not, but if the father is struggling and he is looking for that support from the person who is trying to adjust into motherhood themselves, who's got their own things going on, if they're looking to support that without the supportive services, it takes a toll on what we see as the patient. And that's why we do need better support at the beginning. And I think it makes it then easier for parents as they go through the parenting journey to look for support. But I don't want it to sound like we're ending on a negative, because we're not, because I think it's really positive that we've got 1,000 fathers that have engaged, which is incredible. And so many of them, you know, looking at the fact that, yeah, maybe we are getting things wrong and maybe I could do things a little bit better, but celebrating being parents, which unfortunately, like I said, society doesn't always do. So I think it is very positive. And once again, Kathy, thank you very much.